name is Nicole. I'm one of the new teaching liaison librarians of the University of Newcastle, and today I'd like to talk a little bit about literature reviews. But before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country on which the university footprint is present. So the University of Newcastle acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands within our footprint areas, the Wawabekal, Darrinjung, Biripi, Worimi, Wurrunga and Eora nations. We also pay respect to the wisdom of elders past and present. So today I'd like to run through a little bit about literature reviews. And we're going to cover a range of things, of which a lot of this you will find in the library LibGuide, and I'll post those links or some suggestions for other help options at the end of the presentation. So we're going to have a look at today, what is a literature review, the purpose of doing a literature review, besides the fact that your lecturer has asked you to do it, where you might find some information to help you with your literature review, what sort of search strategies you might want to think about in terms of finding good stuff, in terms of information. And also in terms of how you might undertake some critical reading, because not all information is good stuff, how you might evaluate some resources, and in particular they're thinking about some of the website information that you may come across. And then starting to put it together in terms of the structure of your literature review, how you might go about that, or what the expectation is. And as I mentioned earlier, being able to find some other points of help if you get a bit stuck with things. Okay, so the million-dollar question is, what is a literature review? Basically, it's a critical look at existing research for a specific area. And critical, and it also means in-depth look, not just kind of looking at some of the broad ideas that might be around there. It's actually looking into things, how the research was undertaken, what topics they're looking at, some of the information that they've discovered, anything that they may have come up with. So in terms of then its purpose when you're actually doing a literature review, what you're looking at is for a specific subject area. You're looking at the theoretical framework, so what's behind it. Also, you want to define the terms. As you may be aware, there's often a lot of terms that can be a little bit sort of muddied, and they can mean different things in different circumstances. A classic for that is sustainability. Maybe having an environmental science background, that's a term that gets bandied around quite a bit, but it means different things in different circumstances. So you need to be very specific about what you mean, given the nature of what you're looking at. Okay, it also, part of that is identifying models, case studies, and identifying other studies that have been done on the particular topic that you're interested in. And then also you need to define what your research topic actually is. Because things can be might start off very broad, but you may well need to become more specific to narrow things down a bit so it doesn't become something that's completely unmanageable. So you may need to be a little bit ruthless. Don't be scared. Okay, so the aim of a research is to look at the research theory for a report and find out what they've done, explain the methodology in terms of the methods used, the theories that they're looking at, and also look for any gaps that are actually in the research, because they may have answered part of the question and then what they've found has actually opened up other questions that need to be answered. So identifying those may also then be something that you end up looking at as part of your research. So really important to think about things and understand what you're looking at, and understand what sort of methodology that they're looking at. Okay, so the next bit that I'd like to have a bit of a look at is talking about some of the sources. So you've got a bit of an idea now what you're going to have a look at, like what sort of particular areas of the literature that you're interested in, what specific topics that you want to have a look at. The next million-dollar question comes of, so where am I going to find information on this sort of stuff? So to me, it really depends on what type of question you're looking at as to what type of sources may lend themselves to helping you answer that question. In some cases, some of the things like the journal databases and other databases may be a really good start. and provide all the information that you need. But in other cases, depending on the topic, you may be interested in things like government reports or conferences. Big thing about conferences is often that information is presented there first before it may end up in a journal, or it could be vice versa. So conference papers may be a source of information on the topic that you're looking at. Again, but you do need to be careful with those. Also, there may be some existing theses. Someone may have just finished a master's or a PhD on an aspect of what you're looking at, so please don't discount those. And the university has a repository where you can have a look at the published aspects of those. And in some cases, you may need to have a look into the statistics stuff, the statistics aspect of things. So the ABS or health data may be really quite critical on that line. So there are a range of options. And in terms of that, but again, it comes back to what question you're looking at. So I suggest that you have a bit of a look through and a bit of a think about the types of information that you want to be able to find out. It also may depend on what sort of industry that you're looking at in terms of the question where you're doing a literature review on. So keeping those kind of sources in mind, the next question comes up is, so how do we then find some stuff? It's all well and good to say we've got all these options to have a look at. How do we then kind of go, well, rightio, how do we source the information out of the repositories and those sorts of things? So thinking about things like your key terms, what are you going to search under? The big thing about a lot of the search stuff is a couple of things. Someone needs to have written something on it, plus they need to have published it for you to be able to find it. The other issue too, in terms of finding some stuff, is that you may end up, there may be an embargo period on some of the journals. So while they may have published it, if the journal has a 6 or 12-month embargo period where we can't get access to those articles, you may not be able to source that. So thinking about things may then mean that you need to broaden some of your key terms and pick up some of the slightly older research or that sort of thing. So think carefully about your key terms. In another situation, I had students looking for, I think it was mosquito-borne diseases in Southeast Queensland. And when they put in Southeast Queensland in particular out of those keywords, they found it was too specific and they had to then become a bit more general, because that actually led them to finding absolutely no results. So thinking carefully about what you want to use. Think about in terms of Boolean operators, what we mean by that is where words might be spelled differently, or you might be looking at an abbreviation. So I guess there's a few classics on the Boolean stuff in terms of how words, you've got child, children, few options that way. You've got management, so you might put, and then you've got managerial. There's various words that can then flow on from that. So thinking about what you might look at in those things where you might be able to pick up some more search results. The other good way that I've seen that can be quite helpful as you're building your search terms and looking certainly through some of the databases and other places, is building and combining searches. So what we mean by that, instead of putting all say you've got 4 search terms and putting them all in one search and hitting the button and going, yay, or damn, I haven't found anything. What you might like to do is put them in individual lines and search separately. That can have one really big advantage. So it may help identify which of your search terms, if there is one, that is basically killing your research. You're killing your search and providing no results for you. So it can be a way to help overcome those particular problems. And that way then you can also look at refining things and changing some of your search terms to see what else you might find. Another thing that I find can be quite valuable, and certainly some of the stuff that I've seen, and I've had a little bit of a play in a lot of the business databases and in particular, and I tend to find that once I've found some information that I'm looking at, filtering your information down the side can be really quite valuable. So things like, I call it putting out the trash. So putting out things that are maybe more than 5 years old. So saying, I don't want anything that's pre-2015, 2016 in terms of my search results, because things have changed so much in the area that I'm looking at, so on and so forth. It might also help to find some more search terms as well, because down the side, there's opportunities to have a look at other options that way. The other thing too to think about for certainly in some areas, is the issue of peer-reviewed stuff, and the filtering can be a way to make sure that you're identifying the peer-reviewed elements that are present within your findings. A couple of other things that I found can be quite helpful is when you're looking at your search terms, what you might like to do is create yourself mind map where you sort of note some of the search terms that you use and some of the things that didn't work for you. Can be very, very helpful if you've got to come back and replicate something, or you want to try something or change a few things down the track. That can be another way to do it. Not saying it has to be artistically pretty, even just a list of things that you've played with, and make sure you save your searches and that sort of thing, which can be very, again, another way to come back and have a look at stuff. Okay, so we've got in and we've had a bit of a play and we've found what we might think is the ultimate article or book on about our topic that we're looking for. But then you can hit the snag that you can't get access to that item. The library doesn't hold it. Don't despair. There are ways and means that the library can look at obtaining it for you. We've got the Bonus Plus system and also Get It, which will pick up journals and books for you from if another institution happens to hold them. Couple of things to be aware of though, it takes time for any of those sort of requests to be processed, especially if it's a book, it's got to come, and good old Australia Post is not always the quickest in terms of sending stuff to us. So please don't leave it to the last minute, give yourself plenty of time. The other thing too is with journals, sometimes there can be copyright issues which may mean that you can't get access to that article. So please be a little bit patient with things and we'll see what we can do for you. We'll certainly have a really good go at trying to get stuff. But there can be the odd snag, if that makes a bit of sense. Okay, so we've now got some stuff. We put in our requests if we couldn't find things. So the next thing that we need to think about is actually doing some critical reading of the stuff that we've actually found, the books, the journal articles, the reports, depending on what you're doing. And really, to be the most successful in this, we really do need to understand what your topic is about and what the terminology means. Without this, it can be really, really hard to to be able to critically evaluate and critically look at the contents that you're looking for or you're looking through. You may find too with this that you need to be a bit more ruthless with your research in terms of putting a limit of maybe time. Could be 2015 could be too generous in terms of the amount of stuff. There could have been a huge explosion in the research done in the last few years on your particular topic, and you might need to say, look, it can't be any earlier than 2019. Don't be scared to do that sort of thing. You also may need to consider location. Things may be affected differently depending on where you are in the world in relation to the topic that you are interested in looking at. The other thing too is that as part of this, you might also start to look at, am I looking at a chronological aspect of the particular issue that I'm going through? So for example, thinking about, say, cancer treatments over time, they've gone from being, I guess, a little bit general in the case of trying to deal with things to being now quite specific and quite targeted. Or are you just looking at a thematic from a thematic aspect? Up to you, but again, very helpful if you actually define this, because it will make writing your paper a lot easier. And also, what is the purpose of the research that you're reading about and what you're trying to keep in mind in relation to what you're looking to write down the track? Okay, so while you're doing your critical reading and looking through stuff and thinking about things, part of this also then comes with evaluating that particular resource. Suggest that before you start evaluating and sort of doing a lot of heavy reading, work out how you're going to make notes about, as you do read something, how you're going to make notes about whether you agree with the argument. Are there any alternatives? Are you going to create notes on the PDF? Are you going to create yourself a big spreadsheet or a table in Word where you're going to put the details of the source down one side and comments in a table situation? How are you going to set it up that you can then come back and easily find this stuff to sort of then draw your paper together that you'll have to write eventually? You may have to read quite a bit or quite widely to be able to define and really get your head around what the topic is about. And it's a lot easier if you make some notes. It may be easier for you if you make some notes as you go. What's going to work for you? Long one is that you're the one who has to submit this, and so suggest that you work out what's going to work for you. So in terms of agreeing with the argument, if you don't agree with it, do you want to make some notes about why you don't agree with it? Is it the method that they've used? Something else doesn't quite sit well with you? That's Not saying it's not legitimate, just make sure that, you know, make a note about that sort of stuff. You might want to ask some questions a bit more about the methodology that they use. What alternatives exist? Are there another way to conduct the same type of study? If there isn't, make a note of that. Also need to talk about things like the methodology. Is it credible? Like, for example, if they're looking at measuring immunity in someone, is doing a study for 2 weeks long enough to work out that immunity level? Or do they need to look at something 6 or 12 months? Is that a more realistic time frame for those sorts of questions? What sort of data did they produce out of the end of the presentation or out of the end of the research? Can you interrogate that and ask some more questions of it? And how does it actually apply to your own work? If you're looking, you've identified a gap in terms of part of some of your stuff, or you're looking at one sort of thing, how does it apply to you? Does it fill a gap, or does it simply ask you more questions? Not saying that that's necessarily a problem, but how does that help you with defining an area of investigation that you might like to undertake as a result of what you're finding in terms of your resources? Okay. Are there any questions, Ben, or are we right to keep wandering?
We're right to keep going. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of a little bit more about resource evaluation and that, one of the things or one of the sources that you may find, depending on the topic that you're doing, is some website stuff. With this, one of the nice things about the databases is that you can pick up the peer-reviewed elements for things. But with the general website stuff, you may need to put your detective's hat on and actually ask a few more questions and be a little bit more critical of things, because some of the things like peer-reviewed elements don't always come up with the website sources. So in terms of authority, who wrote it? So with this, it's a really good idea to actually investigate the author. So you're looking at, in terms of authority, in terms of accuracy, is it just a fact or opinion paper that they're doing? Or does it have a little bit more credibility than that? How reliable is it? Do they actually provide you with a good data set that you can actually do? Does it actually sort of explain things really well? How valid is their methodology? If they used a really good set of processes? Further to this, is there any biases in the paper that you can identify? In terms of, also as part of the author, who do they work for? Are they working for a drug company if it's a medical thing? Or are they working for a university research aspect, or out of one of the hospitals? So again, looking at asking some of those types of questions. In terms of timeliness, when was it done? Is it done in the last few years, or is it 10 or 15 years old? It's not as easy to filter some of that stuff on the web as it is in the databases. And also in terms of the illustrations, do they look professional, or do they look like they've got a 2-year-old who's been having some fun with some pen and a piece of paper to put their diagrams together for them? Are they the sorts of things that lend credibility and professionalism to the resource that you're actually seeing here? The big thing about any of the resources is there's a lot of information out there, and if it doesn't answer your question, then don't be scared to look elsewhere or keep looking to find further options that you may need. So there is a really important thing to be critical here. Okay, so we've got to the point where we've had a bit of a read of stuff. We might be starting to think about trying to put our literature review together. But you may well find that you get partway through it, you need to add some more stuff. But before you start to write, strongly suggest that you consult the assessment guide. With some of the examples I've seen, you can actually use headings in some cases, but not all cases. So please make sure that your marker, what sort of exact, whether they're prepared to have headings other than the title and a reference list heading. Can you put headings as part of the main part of your report or your literature review, sorry, as opposed to actually having to write it strictly as an essay. So basically it comes down to that there's 3 parts to our literature review. The first one is the introduction. So a bit like an essay, you're going to define the topic that you're doing. You're going to explain the reasons for doing the review, and you're going to explain the sequence of the review that's to follow. So you might talk a little bit about the history, some of the methods that's been used, and then some of the gaps, explaining how you're going to actually outline things. In the body of your report, what you'll need to do there is provide the results based on however you decided to look at it, whether you're looking at it from a chronological viewpoint or a theme. Explain what the data is showing you and what some of the research is showing, and provide links between the review of what you found and the topic of research that or investigation that you want to undertake from here. And then in the conclusion, you need to summarize the important aspects of what you found, explain the currency of the literature, because that could well be a gap, the fact there may not have been a lot done in the last 12 months or 2 years, identifying any gaps that you've discovered, finalizing any areas of future study that in particular that you're looking to do, and link the research to the existing knowledge and show how that's built on things, but as well as identifying then the links to the gaps that may be there.
We do have a question, Nicole.
Yep.
So Mattia wants to know, how does doing a lit review as an assessment compare to doing it as a part of a PhD?
To me, often with an assessment, sometimes as part of an assessment task, what they'll do is they'll split it up for students. In terms of a PhD, to me, it'd be something that you would probably do as the first couple of chapters or initial part of your bigger study from that side, helping you identify and explain why you've picked this particular aspect to research, investigate further. Does that answer your question, Matthias?
It's just gone a bit silent.
No, that's okay. Because I'm looking at it as creating the background for doing a PhD would be my thought. So it would form part of the first couple of chapters or the first chapter or so of your write-up is creating this structure and this, I guess, argument as to why you've picked this sort of topic.
Yeah, and I guess as a PhD, it would be more like self-driven rather than structured in an assessment.
And yes, most definitely. But in terms, you'd go through a lot of the same sorts of things to be able to say, the reason I'm doing this is we found a gap. I'm interested in investigating this aspect further. It's a nice way to do it. Yeah.
And Ruth just said, yeah, it's a chapter for PhD students. Yep.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay. So the last little bit I wanted to mention is there is some help. The library is certainly able to provide you with some assistance whether you're doing a PhD or it's simply an assessment task at a undergraduate or postgraduate level. There, as I mentioned earlier, there is a library guide that looks at literature reviews. There's also a heap of subject guides that may help you identify some of the databases and those sorts of things that might be a helpful start if you're starting to look for literature and that sort of thing. We've also got the joys of the referencing stuff. So please, as you find your stuff, please don't forget to grab all the details so that you don't have the nightmare of referencing, trying to find out where you got stuff from eventually. And if you want to actually talk to someone because you've got a bit stuck or you're looking to bounce some ideas off someone, then you're always welcome to do book a librarian, either come in face-to-face at the campuses or you can go for an online session and someone can help you work your way through some of the questions that you may have as part of this. So that was all I was looking to cover. Are there any other questions that anyone may have?
Now is the perfect time. We've got a captive librarian audience.
And if you can't think of something, you're always welcome to drop a question in library chat and someone can help you out. Or yeah, drop into the libraries and we can happy to answer your questions.
We've got a few things coming through. So if we want to borrow a physical book, but we're an online student and not in Australia, are there any suggestions?
At the moment, that's a tough one. The thing, in some cases, there might be an ebook option type thing that they might be able to access. The big thing, the other option that there is too, if it's just simply a chapter that people want out of a book, rather than the whole item, there's a possibility that you could put a request in for that to be scanned and sent to you. So please explore from that side. And it would be, I guess, a really good question for a Booker librarian where you can sort of see and find out some of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and generally the University of Newcastle Library has a digital first policy.
Yep.
So we do have a lot of ebook and e-resources, especially for well, for all students, but because we do have a large cohort from overseas.
Yep. The other, another line on that is also to have a look if you happen to be living in a university town, you might be able to get some reciprocal borrowing rights or get access to the item through that library as well, through a local university library. So explore your options from that side if you can't, if we're unable to, yeah, the ebook doesn't quite happen.
We have a question on where to find information on integrative review. I haven't heard of that. Have you?
No, I was going to say I have to take that one on notice and get back to you. Could you drop some more details in the chat in terms of an email address where we could get back in touch with you, please, to the person who asked the question?
And are literature review structures different in different disciplines?
I guess the big thing there is from what I've read, not necessarily, but I would definitely have a look at what the marking guide that you have been given as part of your assessment task. And if you're not sure, please talk to your lecturer, because the long run is, or whoever's going to mark it for you, because it'll be them that will have a preference or whatever as to what they want to do. But generally speaking, you're going to have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. To me, one of the big things is whether you can use headings and maybe some of the bits and pieces they may want you to include as part of that, some of the details and those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. And for a chronological review, how many years should we consider a minimum?
I guess to me, it would depend very much on the topic. Some things have changed quite significantly, and it also then would depend too on the audience that you are writing for. So, because a big thing is if you often have a word limit for these, certainly if you're doing it as part of your coursework. If you've got, say, a 2.5 or 3,000 word limit, you may find that ends up helping to dictate how far back you go. And it depends on how much background information that you need to provide as well. So it might be a case that, again, might be something that you have a chat to your lecturer about and sort of go ask the question as to how much assumed knowledge in terms of explaining a lot of the background and the detail. Where you may need to go into a little bit of depth is if you're picking a particular aspect and you may need to explain how that element, say a particular type of drug that was used for a treatment, became, I guess, the normal or something that they're looking to do, or it creates a problem. You might have to explain a bit more about that, but you could possibly maybe avoid some of the other stuff. So again, it depends to me very much on the topic that you're doing.
Sure. We also have a question on what do you do when you come across journal articles that don't have access to the University of Newcastle and have a cost?
That's when you can put in a request through the to the Get It system, and we'll see what we can do for you.
Yeah, and that's free as well. So it's just, as long as you put as much detail as you can in there, the library can try and source you a copy. Yep. Sage Research Methods Online will be a good source for info on integrative reviews. Oh, thanks, Ruth. That's pretty much it. Oh, hang on. Yep. Is the format for writing up a systematic review similar to a lit review?
I think I'd have to take the question on notice because I haven't had a lot to do with systematic reviews. My understanding from what I have seen is that you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the use of things like headings and stuff like that in a systematic review as opposed to a literature review. But I'd need to get back to you with some more details on that. They are
Sure.
different things from that side. Yeah.
Yep. And we just got another question. How long is a PhD lit review?
I remember when not that I ever did a PhD, but when I did I had to write a thesis as part of my studies, it was always quality over quantity. So to me, it would be a case of, and something that you probably want to chat with your supervisor about it as to how much detail that you need to provide and how long it should be. They'd probably be the best people to guide you in relation to that. But you do need to provide enough information that it sets the scene for what you do.
Yeah. All right. I think we can leave it there for today.
Awesome.
Perfect. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And thanks for coming along. Appreciate it.